If you've been keeping up with me or my videos, you've undoubtedly noticed that I chose to prog this tier on Astrologian. This probably came as a surprise to you, but it also came as a surprise to me, since I had initially planned on running White Mage for prog, just like last tier. If we back up a month or so, I had a conversation with my raid lead where he asked me what I was planning on bringing week 1 this tier, and my answer was that I was 90% confident that I was going to play White Mage. My group planned to clear week 1, and in week 1 prog, the only thing that matters is getting the maximum value out of every single pull. That means as a healer, regardless of how much spaghetti happens, your responsibility is to try your hardest to recover every single situation. And it's a well-known fact that White Mage is the king of spaghetti. The ability to chain res with Thin Air and Panic Cure 3 is simply unparalleled. So where does this 10% of doubt come from? As a week 1 player, you're generally expected to pick up a full crafted set for prog, and as a result, you don't get to pick and choose your stats the way you'd ordinarily be able to. Generally, this leads to crafted sets having quite a bit of piety, something that is generally wasted on White Mage, but a godsend on Astrologian. One way to compare White Mage and Astro is that Astrologian would crush White Mage in terms of DPS if it was able to wear the same gear. And so, if both the classes are wearing the same gear week 1, and the gear has enough piety for Astro has a bit of a DPS advantage despite its drawbacks, and I thought that could be meaningful for clearing the last floor. I didn't really put too much stock in this though. I even joked around and said, I'm playing White Mage unless I get a sign from the gods. But I woke up on that Tuesday morning, and if that crafted set wasn't a sign from the gods, I don't know what is. Out of the 11 crafted pieces, 8 of them had piety, and only 3 of them had spell speed. If you add the ruby weapon to that set, you'd end up with a ridiculous 2,458 piety, which is honestly wasted on anything other than an Astro. It seemed like all the necessary ingredients were there. The crafted set looked perfect, all of the crafted and ruby weapons for healers had piety, and you had me, an Astro main with a record of playing Astro against his better judgment. But you already know how this story ends. I ended up playing Astrologian, and my group cleared Shiva on day 6 after about 30 hours of prog. And so the big question I want to talk about is, did I make the right choice, or did I just get jebaited by the healer gods? Surprisingly, I think Astrologian was absolutely the correct choice for me this tier. So I want to take a moment to talk about my experience playing Astro for hardcore prog, and along the way dispel some myths about Astrologian being a bad prog healer, as well as point out some things about Astro that I had never even considered before this tier. In particular, I want to compare prog Astro to prog White Mage, since this is usually the decision healers like me have to make. So let's go through a list of reasons why White Mage was considered the superior prog healer in Stormblood, and see if they still apply this tier. Number 1. Astrologian has mana issues in prog and can't comfortably provide DPS. While it is very true that Astro has more MP issues than White Mage, this is more so true in an optimized setting where neither class has to do much healing. At low levels of piety, Astro can actually run out of mana without doing any healing whatsoever. But if you flip the tables and think about fights that require a lot of healing, it actually turns out that the more healing required, the smaller the gap between Astrologian and White Mage becomes. Think about it this way, Astro has a lot of powerful OGCDs that save at GCD healing casts, but also has cheaper spell costs. For example, Aspected Helios is 300 MP cheaper than Medica 2, and 500 cheaper than Cure 3. So not only does Astro need to do fewer GCD heals, but they also don't cost as much. Of course, White Mage can get a lot of this back with the size and good usage of Thin Air, but the bottom line is that neither class really has any trouble healing in prog, especially with 2500 piety. Number 2. Astrologian is ineffective at chain raising and dealing with deaths. Let's think about those prog situations where everything has gone full spaghetti and half the party has died, including possibly your co-healer. Without Lightspeed or Thin Air, neither class can really handle more than 3 raises, even at very high MP. So what happens if you do have these tools available? For a White Mage, you can get 1 hard-casted raise under Thin Air, but not 2. You might not know this, but if Thin Air falls off while you're casting a spell you don't have mana for, the spell will cancel. So even though Thin Air lasts for 12 seconds, you can't get 2 slow raises into it, even with Presence of Mind. Of course, you can still get 2 free raises if you swift cast one of them. So Thin Air saves you 2400 mana in general, or 4800 mana in an ideal situation. What about Astro and Lightspeed? Lightspeed lasts for 15 seconds and saves you 1200 mana a raise. It also comes with the added benefit of allowing you to raise 2.5 seconds faster, so you can easily fit 2 5-second raises in that Lightspeed window, or a third with Swiftcast. So overall, if you have to hard raise just one person, White Mage can do it for 1200 less mana. If you have to hard raise 2 people, Astro does just as well as White Mage. If you have Swiftcast and need to raise 3 or more people, Astrologian again only does 1200 mana worse. So while there's a variety of situations where Astro is marginally worse at chain raising, some of this is made up for by the fact that Astro can chain raise faster, which is valuable too. Of course, it's more common for White Mages to have Thin Air available compared to Astros in Lightspeed, because Thin Air's only common use in prog is for raising because you have so much piety. Once you've got your party back on its feet, however, I think Astro has a distinct advantage. Now that Astro has 2 charges of Essential Dignity, you practically always have a stack ready, and it's a disgustingly effective heal on party members you've just raised. Aspected Benefic also has some niche uses over regen, because its initial hit healing potency makes the regen faster, healing for the same amount in a slightly shorter amount of time, which might make the difference in getting a party member topped off in time for the next raid wide. And finally, when the pressure is on, Astro is able to synastry pairs of players together and spam Benefic too, whereas White Mage needs Benediction to top off multiple players that quick. Number 3. Astrologian has a harder time recovering from dying. Dying as a healer is always a difficult situation to come back from. Not only have you lost valuable uptime that you could have spent healing, you've probably lost a lot of mana, and now your heals are only 75 or 50% as effective as before. In my opinion, dying on White Mage is even worse than dying on Astrologian. When you revive with about 2200 mana, which is enough for 2 Medicas, or a Medica and a Medica 2 if you wait a second for a mana tick. If you use Cure 3 though, you're pretty much locked out of doing anything for 5 to 10 seconds. For an Astro, on the other hand, 2200 MP is enough to pick and choose any 2 GCD heals and still have some mana left over. But this isn't the biggest difference between the two. When a White Mage dies, they lose their lilies. Afflatus spells would be perfect for a freshly resurrected White Mage, but unfortunately they're never available. When an Astro dies, on the other hand, they lose their cards. This is certainly problematic, but ultimately doesn't affect the safety of your group. At the same time, dying hasn't affected any of Astro's many OGCD options. Out of Horoscope, Celestial, Bubble, and Star, it's almost certain that some of these options will be available, and as a result you can generally find close to an extra 1000 healing potency compared to White Mage, all of this free of charge. If you die on White Mage, and you don't have Thin Air or Lucid available, it's quite possible that you're just screwed. But when an Astro dies, the damage is generally both smaller and easier to recover from, and for this reason, I think Astro has a definitive edge when it comes to recovery. Number 4. Earthly Star is too hard to use during prog. I think people really tend to oversell the difficulty of placing stars in prog. Sure, there's a ton of ways each star can go wrong. Maybe it pops too soon, or it isn't ready in time, or maybe certain members of your party won't be able to be healed by it. But the nice thing about prog is that you're doing tons and tons of pulls, so you have a lot of time to tinker with your stars, whether that's placing them earlier or later, or communicating to your group where you'd like them to stand for healing. Each pull gives you another chance to think about your stars and whether you should move any of them. So while using star effectively is hard, the progression experience helps mitigate that. Prog is actually the easiest time to use star. Imagine if you played a different healer and then decided to switch to Astrologian after clearing the tier. You'd be really lost if you were thrown into a fight that you had on farm and were expected to find a whole set of good stars. In fact, you'd probably just want to reach out to an Astro who did prog the fight and have them help you out. Number 5. Astrologian can't compete with the power of Cure 3. Alright, let's be real here. Cure 3 is getting to be a little outdated. While I do think that not having a Cure 3 equivalent was a bit of a problem for Astro and Stormblood, I don't think that's an issue anymore. In Shadowbringers, every class has such an overloaded healing toolkit that I rarely bother with Cure 3 on White Mage because most burst healing is handled with Plenary Indulgence or solved with the addition of heals from your co-healer. When push comes to shove, Astro can rely on spamming Neutral Sect Aspected Helios, which is a 450 potency heal, even if you disregard the healing buff and regens provided from Neutral Sect. When you combine all of this with a raid tier that doesn't really require any significant amount of sustained healing, not having Cure 3 really isn't a disadvantage. Number 6. Astrologian's DPS kit is inferior during prog. Honestly, it only takes a quick look at FF logs to see that this isn't true. Astrologian is simply outperforming White Mage across the board in terms of DPS at every single percentile. And before you start saying things like rankings are skewed because we're well into the tier and everyone has started optimizing, it's been like this the entire tier, even in early weeks where groups are only uploading their very first clears. Even without any real optimization, Astro still comes out on top. So why is that? It's obvious that cards aren't good in prog. They distract you from healing, your other party members aren't playing optimally, and your raid buffs probably aren't perfectly aligned. But what you might not be considering is that Astro is uniquely well suited to provide high personal DPS for prog. Think about it. As a White Mage, trying to squeeze out every possible glare is an enormous chore. Keeping uptime as a White Mage often requires greedy positioning, strats catered to you, delayed heals, and generally a whole list of things that don't mesh well with prog. But Astro can handle many of these issues in stride. Astro can slide cast much further than White Mage, and when difficult movement comes along, Astrologians can often just hold lightspeed to maintain uptime at virtually no cost. There were many places in prog where my raid leader would ask, "Does this strategy cost anybody uptime?" And the only reason I could say yes was because I was playing Astro and not White Mage. All in all, the point I want to make is not that Astrologian is a better prog healer than White Mage. I don't believe that. But I do think that Astro gets more crap than it deserves, and for reasons that don't really apply anymore. Times have changed, and a re-evaluation of how we compare these classes is long overdue. In Stormblood, there was a really clear line dividing these two classes. Unless you were a die-hard supporter of one class or the other, it was really common to play White Mage for prog, and Astro for optimization. The two classes served different purposes, and they were on opposite ends of the spectrum. It was as simple as that. But nowadays, White Mage has less of a lead in prog and is much better in optimized scenarios. And conversely, Astro is less of an optimization god, but more solid in progression. At the end of the day, I want your takeaway to be that both of these classes are really strong in every environment, and that you shouldn't feel pressured to switch off your preferred job because of some perceived notion that one class is significantly better in whatever situation you're in. That just isn't true. We're in a really cool time right now where the optimal class for you to play is also the class you want to play. So abuse this, and play what you like.